There is an old saying among the land agents and reckoners of the Shire country that a great estate never lies about its health, for the fields and the rent book will tell you the truth of it long before the master learns it at his own table. But a ledger is only paper, and paper will say whatever the hand that fills it is paid to make it say, and the whole art of an honest reckoning is to know the one from the other. Margaret Aldous had kept the true accounts at Wyverne for 11 years, and no one above the rank of bailiff had troubled to learn her name. She was 39 when the story properly begins, a spare, plain, upright woman with quick ink-stained fingers and a level gray gaze that missed nothing across a column of figures, dark hair going early to gray beneath a plain cap. She had been born in the steward's cottage at the edge of the Wyverne Park, and learned her whole trade before she could sew, at her father's counting desk, in the one school that never gave a certificate and never took a fee. She held no office the family would have recognized, for a woman could not be a steward, and drew no wage above an upper servant's. She was simply the person the estate office leaned upon when a rent would not tally or a bill made no sense or a quarter's figures came out crooked. And it was understood that whatever tangle Margaret Aldous could not reckon straight was not to be reckoned straight by anyone at Wyverne short of a London counting house. The morning the new Duke came home, she was in the estate office with the Michaelmas rents, and she did not go up to the house to see him arrive. "You'll not even come and look?" said young Peter Hale, the bailiff's boy grown to a long-legged clerk, hanging in the office doorway with his hat shoved back and his cheeks red from running. "There's a coach and 4 and outriders, and they say he's brown as a nut and hard as a ship's timber and hasn't smiled since the old Duke died, and Mr. Cade has the whole household lined up on the steps like a ship's company. Won't you come, Mrs. Aldous? He hasn't come home to see the woman who keeps the rent book," Margaret said, without lifting her eyes from the column, "and this quarter's figures will not add themselves while I stand on the steps to be nodded at, and if I lose my place in this reckoning I'll be an hour finding it again. Go and be looked at, Peter, since you want it so, and mind you stand still and don't gawp." "They say he was a sea captain," Peter went on, undeterred, twisting the brim of his hat, "that he took a French frigate off Finisterre and was made post before he was 30, and stood on his own quarterdeck through more actions than he's years, and that's why he looks the way he looks. Cook says a man like that will turn the house upside down. Cook says he'll want every account squared to the minute and every man jack of us kept to the log." "Cook says a great deal," said Margaret, "and has never yet kept a book. A sea captain knows the worth of an honest reckoning and the price of a false one, in my experience, for a ship's purser that cooks his stores is a ship's company starved at sea, and a captain learns young to smell it. Or he doesn't, and he isn't worth the coat he stands in, and either way, it's no affair of ours until he comes down to the office and tells us his mind. Now hold your noise, you'll lose me my place. Carry the 7. Carry the 7. Peter went, disappointed, and Margaret carried the 7 and did not think about the new Duke at all, or told herself she did not. He was the old Duke's son, home from the sea to a title and a house full of the dust of long neglect, and if he was hard as a ship's timber, Margaret thought, that was the business of his valet and his God, and no concern of a woman who would in all likelihood never exchange a word with him from this day to the day she died. She was wrong about that, as it happened, but not for 11 days. In those 11 days the estate learned its new master sidelong in the currency of scraps carried down to the office. He did not bluster. That was the first thing they said of him, and they said it uneasily, for a blustering master can be managed. But a quiet, exacting one keeps his own counsel, and you never know where you stand. He walked the estate every morning, alone, and stood at gates and looked long at fields, and came back with a face like a shut ledger. He had brought from the sea exactly one man of his own, a grave, weathered ship's clerk turned secretary, and for the rest took the household as he found it, and looked at the ranked servants that first morning with steady gray eyes that seemed to be sounding them all, the way a leadsman sounds a strange channel, for the trouble under the smooth surface. On the 11th day, the Duke's man came down to the estate office and asked for her by the name the household used, which was not quite her own. His name was Corvin, and he was a lean, grave, weathered person of perhaps 50, with the squint of a man who had spent his life reading small print in bad light and the flat, unhurried voice of a man who had kept a ship's books through gales that would have scattered a shore-going clerk's wits to the four winds. He stood in the office doorway with his hat in his hand and looked round at the ranked pigeonholes and the great map and the shelves of leather-bound ledgers, and then at her, as she straightened from the strong-box with a smudge of ink on her wrist. "You are the woman they call Aldous," he said, "the one that keeps the figures straight when the office cannot." "I am Sir Meg Aldous." "His Grace has a difficulty," Corvin said, and the flat voice went carefully level. "With the accounts. It should be a rich estate, good land, full tenancies, no debt anyone will own to, and yet the money runs out of it like water from a cracked cask, and no man can tell him where. Mr. Cade lays a ledger before him every quarter, handsome and ruled to a hair, and it all tallies, and at the foot of it there is somehow nothing left. His Grace is no fool with a figure, but he cannot fault it, and it is eating him. He has sent to London for a famous auditor who comes within the week, but I've looked at that too handsome ledger, and I do not think it is a bad season that ails this estate, and I've no standing to say so. You've kept more true books than any man in this county, so I'm asking you, come and look at it, before the London man does." Margaret set down the strong-box key. "Mr. Corvin," she said carefully, "I keep the rents and the tradesman's accounts in the tenant book, and always have, and there's no secret in that the office knows I've a head for it. But the steward's own ledger, the great account, the whole of it, that is Mr. Cade's book, kept by Mr. Cade in Mr. Cade's own hand, and it is not my place to walk into the muniment room uninvited and pull down a book I was never given leave to open, and be blamed for whatever's found or not found in it. The famous man they'll have from London," said Corvin, "will sit 3 days in that room, and take Mr. Cade's own copies from Mr. Cade's own hand, and dine at Mr. Cade's own table of an evening, and go back to London with a fat fee and a clean certificate, and tell His Grace his steward is an honest man, and his estate an unlucky one. That is what a famous man is, in my experience of them. He will audit the ledger against itself, and a ledger will always agree with itself, for the same hand wrote both sides of it. You, I am told, to trust. Will you come, or will you not? You are told to trust me by whom? By the tenants, half of whom bring their troubles to your window, and not to the steward's. By the bailiff, that says you found the fault in the tithe reckoning 3 years running when the office had given it over. By young Hale, that you taught his letters and his figures both. I made it my business, these few days, to ask the household who among them can read a column of figures the way some men read Scripture, and know when it is lying. Every finger pointed the one way. I am an old ship's clerk, Mrs. Aldous. I have learned to go where the knowing is, and not where the credit is. The knowing is here, in this office, in you, and not in any coach from London. Now, will you come? I'll come, she said. But I'll read that ledger my own way, and against the true accounts and not against itself, for that's the whole trick of it. and it's the trick the London man will miss. A cooked book agrees with itself beautifully. It's the world it won't agree with. I'll want the tradesman's own receipts, the tally sticks from the home farm, the tenant book that I keep myself, and Mr. Cade's great ledger open beside all of it. Set those four things side by side in the light, and a false figure has nowhere left to hide. But I'll not do it in a corner, for a thing done in secret can be called a forgery after. I'll do it in the open, where His Grace himself may watch every column reckoned, and see which book agrees with the world and which agrees only with the man that wrote it. You shall have all four, said Corvin, if I have to sit up the night copying the tenant book by candle. That will not be necessary, said Margaret, reaching for the plain brass counting rule that had been her father's, worn smooth and bright where it lay in the desk drawer among her pens. I keep the tenant book myself, and the tradesman's receipts are in that press, filed by the quarter, for I file everything, being a careful woman, which is a habit Mr. Cade might have studied to his cost. Lead on, Mr. Corvin, and say nothing to Mr. Cade of why I'm sent for a man who has cooked a book will cook it deeper the moment he smells an honest eye upon it, and I'd sooner take him with the pot still on the fire. The muniment room at Wyverne was the strongest in the house, stone-floored and iron-doored, its shelves ranked with the deeds and the ledgers of 200 years, and Margaret had walked past its door 1,000 times in 11 years, and never once had leave to take down the great account. She went to it now, and Corvin unlocked it, and she stood a long while in the doorway, and looked at the handsome ledger where it lay closed on the reading slope, and did not touch it, and let the room settle around her. "Who is that?" said a voice behind her, a hard, low voice, roughened by weather and command, with the flat carry of the quarter-deck in it. "Corvin, who is this woman, and what is she doing at that door?" She turned. The Duke of Wyverne stood a few paces off in the passage, in a plain dark coat, his hands clasped behind him in the way of a man used to a heaving deck. A tall, big-framed man, burned brown by years of salt weather, dark hair, a face that must once have been open and was now merely hard, the skin drawn, and the gray eyes set in a permanent seaward squint. Those eyes, when they found her, held no lordly disdain, only a bleak, exhausted, exacting wariness, the look of a man who has been lied to smoothly for months by a book he cannot fault and is sick to the soul of it. "This is Aldous, your grace," said Corvin steadily. "That keeps the rents in the tenant book. I asked her to look at the great account. On my own head. Did you?" The Duke came closer and looked at Margaret with the flat weariness of a man protecting himself with rank. "The woman from the office. Corvin has been down among the clerks for a prodigy. Well, have you come to charm my accounts into health, mistress? To find in an afternoon the fault that a purser and a famous London man cannot find between them?" "No, your grace," Margaret said. "I've come to read the ledger against the tradesman's receipts, which no one has yet done." That checked him. He had expected fright or fawning or the bright false confidence people bring to hopeless things, and she had given him none of it. "Against the receipts," he repeated. "A ledger, your grace, is only a fair copy of what a man chose to write down. The tradesman's receipts are what the world actually charged. Set the one against the other, line by line, and where they part company is where your money went. It is slow and dull, and wants a person who can hold 100 small figures in her head without wearying, and it is the one thing no one has troubled to do. For it is pleasanter to admire a handsome ledger than to check it against a shoebox of grubby receipts. If you'll permit me, and set your famous man to watch, so that whatever I find, no one may say after that I found it in a corner where it could be doubted. You would have Mr. Pruitt watch you." The Duke's mouth was hard. A London man of business, with letters after his name, watch a woman from my rent office reckon his sums for him. I would have the whole world watch if the room were big enough, said Margaret. A figure fears nothing but daylight. A false account thrives in a locked room and a trusting eye. It dies the moment an honest reckoner sets it beside the truth in the open, where every man may follow the sum. I do not want to whisper it to you in a passage where it may be denied. I want to reckon it aloud, in the light, with the receipts under my hand, until there is not a gentleman in England could look at the 2 columns and call me a liar. Give me the book, the receipts, and a clear morning, and let who will look on. For a long moment she thought he would send her back to her rents. Then something moved in the tired gray eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but the flat, appraising attention of an officer who has just heard, from an unlikely quarter, a sounding that has the ring of the true bottom in it. You are very sure of yourself, he said, for a woman who has not yet opened the book. I am sure of the method, your grace, not the man, said Margaret. Perhaps I'll open that ledger and find Mr. Cade honest and your estate merely unlucky. And I'll say so as plainly as I'd say the other, for I'll not accuse a man on a suspicion. But I've kept the tenant book 11 years, and I know to a shilling what this land brings in, and it brings in a great deal more than ever reaches the foot of Mr. Cade's fair ledger. Where the difference goes, I mean to find out. Deny me, and you may pay your London man his fee and keep your handsome book and your empty coffers both. And I'll go back to my rents and say no more, for it's your money and none of mine. The Duke of Wyverne looked at the plain gray-capped woman with the brass rule in her ink-stained hand for a long moment, in the stone passage, with the dust turning in the light. Open it, he said. In the morning, in the great hall where there is room and light, and I will be there, and Corvin, and Mr. Pruitt when he comes, and Cade himself, for by God, if my steward is to be reckoned, I'll have him answer for his own book to my face. If you are right, Mistress Aldous, I have been robbed under my own roof, and thanked the thief for his fair hand, and I do not care to have done that, and I will owe you, and I do not like to owe. And if you are wrong, and you shame an honest man before my household on a rent clerk's suspicion, it will be on my head that I let you do it, and I will not forgive you for that either. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace, said Margaret Aldous. Then we had best make sure I am right. Give me the book tonight, and the strong box of receipts, and let no one but Corvin know I have them, and I'll have every column reckoned and every falsehood marked by morning, and lay it before you all where it cannot be doubted, or own myself mistaken, which I have done before and lived. She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a month and the Duke did not believe it for longer, that she was simply unglamorously right in the way that competence is right, without any magic in it at all. She sat up the whole of that night with a single candle and her father's brass rule, the great ledger on one side of the desk and 11 years of the world's true receipts on the other, and went down the columns the slow way, receipt against entry, and by the gray of the morning she had it. Not a suspicion, but a thing as hard and cold as a beam of iron. Timber for the new barns paid for in oak and bought in cheap deal, the difference pocketed. The rents of 3 farms entered short by a few pounds each, quarter after quarter, too small to notice and too steady to be chance. Small, patient, deniable thefts adding across 11 years to a fortune quietly bled out of the estate into the pocket of the man paid to guard it. Every stroke in the same fair hand that had so reassured a famous London man. The great hall at Wyverne was cold and high and full of the flat gold light of a winter morning, and they were all there when she came in with her ledger under her arm and the strong box of receipts carried behind her by Corvin. The Duke stood at the head of the long table, hard-faced. Mr. Pruitt sat to one side, a plump, well-dressed London gentleman with a snuff-box and a superior smile, who had dined, as Corvin foretold, at the steward's table, and Josiah Cade stood by the great chimney-piece, a big, handsome, easy man of 55 in good broadcloth, with a fine open face and a way of laughing at his own small jokes, the very picture of the bluff, hard-working steward, beloved of a household he had ruled for 20 years, and he looked at Margaret coming in with her ledger, and something behind the fine open face went very still and very cold, though the smile never moved. "Mistress Aldous," said the Duke, "you have made your reckoning. Make it aloud, now, before us all, and slowly, and let any man here fault it who can." Cade laughed easily and spread his big hands. "Your Grace, I confess I'm at a loss. Meg Aldous keeps my rent book, and keeps it well, none better, and I'll say so to her face. But the great account is a different country, if I may say so, from a rent window. It wants training, and a head for the whole, and, forgive me, Meg, I mean no unkindness, it is not woman's work, nor ever was. Mr. Pruitt here has been over my books 3 days. 1 day, Mr. Cade," said Margaret. "Mr. Pruitt has been over your books 1 day, and dined with you 2 evenings, and he has audited your ledger against your own copies, which is to say he has asked the book whether it agrees with itself. And it does, for you are a careful man and you wrote both sides of it. I have done a different thing. I have asked your book whether it agrees with the world." She laid her ledger on the table and opened it, and opened the great account beside it, and set the strong box of receipts at her hand. "May I begin, your Grace? It will take an hour. It cannot take less, if every man is to follow it. But at the end of the hour there will be no doubt left in this room, and that is worth an hour of anyone's morning." "Begin," said the Duke. She began. And here is the thing that undid Josiah Cade, and undid the plump, smiling London man beside him, and turned the whole cold hall by degrees to stone. She did not accuse, and she did not flourish, and she raised her voice not at all. She simply reckoned. She read the great ledger's entry for the new barns, so many pounds for timber, and then she took from the strong box the timber merchant's own receipt, signed by the merchant's own hand, for a sum less than half. And she laid the two side by side and read them both aloud, and said, "Plainly, the difference is here, your Grace. 11 pounds and some shillings. It went out of your coffers, and it did not go to the merchant, for here is the merchant's hand for what he had. Where it went is not on this page. But it left your money by this door." And she turned the leaf, and did it again, and again, and again. "And so, your Grace," she said at the last, footing the final column and laying down her father's brass rule, "the whole of it, across the 11 years I can reach, comes to this figure here. It is very near the whole of what your estate should have laid by in those years, and did not. Your land has not failed you. Your seasons have not been so very bad. Your tenants have paid their rents, full and true, into this house. The money came in, it simply did not stay, for there was a small steady hole cut in the bottom of the cask, in a fair hand, quarter after quarter, and everything a rich estate should have saved ran out of it into a pocket that was not yours. I cannot tell you from this book whose pocket, but I can tell you it was the pocket that held the pen, for no one else could have cut the hole so neatly and hidden it so long. The great hall was very quiet. Mr. Pruitt had his snuff-box open and had forgotten it, the snuff spilling unregarded down his fine waistcoat. The Duke of Wyverne stood looking at the two open ledgers and the marked receipts as though she had laid a live coal on his table. Josiah Cade's fine open face had not changed, but the color had gone out from behind it, leaving it the color of the tallow candles. "This is," he began, and his easy voice had a crack down the middle of it now. "Your Grace, this is monstrous. A rent clerk, a jumped-up cottage woman with a grievance and a head for petty sums, has sat up a night with a shoebox of receipts and spun you a tale of theft out of honest errors, for there are errors in every great book, Your Grace. No man alive keeps 11 years without a slip, a figure transposed, a receipt mislaid, and she has strung the innocent slips of 20 years' hard stewardship together and called them a crime, out of spite, out of a woman's spite at a man set over her. Are they errors, Mr. Cade?" said Margaret, very quietly, and for the first time she looked full at him. "Then they are the strangest errors in the history of bookkeeping, for every one runs the one way. In 20 years of honest slips, half your errors would fall in the estate's favor and half against, for that is the nature of chance. A transposed figure is as like to help you as harm you. Yet here are 90 and more, and every single one takes money out of the Duke's coffers and not one puts a farthing in. That is not chance. Chance does not steal always in the same direction. Only a man steals always in the same direction. Show me one slip in 11 years that cost you money and enriched the Duke, and I'll grant you the rest are honest. One, I have looked. There is not one. An honest man's mistakes are careless. Yours are all careful. And careful mistakes, sir, have another name." "You are very free," said Cade, and the geniality had curdled clean out of him now, and something ugly showed through where it had been. "Do you know what becomes of a servant that slanders the steward who has fed and housed her family 20 years? Do you know, Your Grace, what I have a fair idea, Mr. Cade," said Margaret. "You may have me turned off the estate this hour, without a character, and at my age and in this country that is very near a sentence of the ditch, and I dare say you know it. I thought of it, sitting up the night with your book, and I find, on the whole, that I would rather be turned off for reckoning the truth of these accounts than kept on for holding my tongue, while an honest master is bled white under his own roof and thanks the leech for its fair hand. So there it is. I've made my reckoning. What his Grace does with it is between him and his conscience, and I'll trouble neither any further than he wishes." For a long moment the hall hung on the edge of it. Then the Duke of Wyverne spoke, and his voice was very quiet and very cold, and it was not at Margaret that he looked. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "you are a famous man of business. You have letters after your name. You have audited these books. In your professional judgment, sir, having now heard this woman reckon the great ledger against the tradesman's own receipts, which you did not trouble to do, are these 90 errors the honest slips of a careful steward, or are they not? And the plump London man who was superior and a little lazy but was not, at bottom, a scoundrel, and had felt the ground go out from under his fine certificate figure by figure, made the only answer a man with a reputation to save could make. They are not honest slips, Your Grace, said Mr. Pruitt heavily. I am ashamed to say it, for it is my trade to catch such things, and I did not, being shown only the one book. But this woman is right. I have never in my life seen a plainer case laid plainer. No bench in England, shown these 2 columns, would call it anything but what it is. He shut his snuff-box with a click. I'll not put my name to that ledger, Mr. Cade, not for any fee. And I'd advise you, sir, to look to yourself. For a reckoning like this one, has a way of ending in a courtroom. Send Cade to his rooms and set Corvin at his door, said the Duke to the hall at large, still not raising his voice, and let nothing leave the muniment room. And you? He turned to Margaret and made her name sound like a challenge. Mistress Aldous, if you are right, and it seems past doubting now that you are, I have let an honest inheritance be robbed under my own roof and blamed the weather for it, and I do not care to have done that, and I will owe you. And I have said already how I feel about owing. Stay. Do not go back to your rent window. There is a great deal of this book that will want unpicking, and only one person in England, it appears, who can unpick it. Will you do it? I'll do it, Your Grace, said Margaret Aldous, gathering her father's brass rule and her marked receipts. It will take the winter to reckon the whole of it back as far as the papers reach and set the accounts of this estate honest again from the ground up. But it can be done by anyone with the patience to sit with the figures and refuse to be charmed by a fair hand. I'll show you your estate's true face again, Your Grace, or as near as the thief has left of it. Josiah Cade went out of the great hall between Corvin and the bailiff, with the ruin of his fine easy manner hanging off him like a wet coat, and did not look at Margaret as he passed, and the household, gathering silent in the passages as households do, watched their beloved bluff steward go by under guard and could not make it fit, for a fortnight, with the man who had laughed at his own jokes and given the boys sixpences at the fair. And Margaret Aldous stood in the cold gold light of the great hall with her ledger under her arm, and thought, with a strange calm, well, that is done. The truth is out and cannot be put back. Now I shall likely be turned off too, when the strangeness wears off. For a great house cannot easily keep the servant who unmade the steward it loved, however true her reckoning. She was wrong about that too, and this time for the rest of her life. For she did not go back to the rent window. She was given the muniment room and the great account itself to keep and to mend. And through the long bright cold of that winter she sat with the ruined books and set them straight, and the Duke came down to the office in the gray of the morning and the flat gold of the afternoon, and stood at the tall window with the estate map behind him, and asked her questions, and, stranger yet, listened to the answers. And by degrees so small neither marked the moment, she and the Duke fell into the strangest intimacy either had ever known, that of two solitary people bent over the same exacting, honest work, where rank thins to almost nothing. And a great man who comes down at dawn to learn the true state of his own inheritance cannot go on pretending the woman who is saving it is beneath his notice. His name, she learned, was Adrian. Not that she ever called him so. But she learned it, as one learns things at a shared task in the early dark. Along with a great deal else he would never have told a fine lady across a drawing-room. "You do not fawn," he said to her one afternoon, watching her rule a fresh column in the mended ledger. He was leaning against the window frame, the winter light hard on his weathered face. "In 2 months you have not once told me the estate is in better case than it is to please me, nor called me poor Your Grace for the wrong I was done, nor made a parade of the night you sat up to catch the man. Why is that?" "Because you'd know I was lying," Margaret said, "and a column of figures would too. For a false figure entered to comfort you throws out every sum below it, and I've spent my life in the company of numbers which cannot be flattered, and lost the knack of flattering anything else. And a man doesn't want to be told his estate is mending faster than it is. He wants the true figure, so he can act on it. You'll not clear the ground your father let go to seed before 3 years are out, whatever your pride would like, for the arrears run deep and must be called in slow, or you'll break the very tenants you depend on. That's the truth of your accounts. Take it or leave it." 3 years, he said. "You are very sure." "I am always sure," said Margaret, "when I am sure. It saves everyone a deal of grief, and the estate a deal of money." He almost smiled. Then she saw the corner of the hard mouth move, the first time she had seen anything like it, and Margaret Aldous felt something turn over in her chest that she had thought too old and too plain and too sensible to feel, and she put it away at once, firmly, the way she carried a doubtful figure to the next page to be dealt with later and not brooded over now, and went on ruling her column. "They are afraid of me," he complained to her one gray afternoon, both of them in the office while the sleet ticked at the tall window. "Every soul in this house. I say a repair is needful, and Fenwick agrees before the words are out of my mouth. I say the weather will break, and it holds, and Fenwick says how wise I was to order the fires banked. I have not had an honest disagreement since I paid off my ship, and a man cannot see his own course, Mistress Aldous, when everyone about him swears the reckoning is right before he has finished working it." "Then it's fortunate for your navigation," said Margaret, blotting a line, "that I've never yet agreed with you when you were wrong, and don't mean to start for an upper servant's wage." "No," he said, and there was something almost wondering in it. "No, you have not. Why is that?" "Corvin fears me, a little, and Corvin kept my books through actions that would have unmanned better men." "Corvin," said Margaret, "has something to lose by you. His place, his pension, your good word when he's too old to squint at a ledger. I've nothing to lose that I didn't have before you came, which is a brass rule and a head for figures and the trust of every tenant that brings his rent to my window. And not one of those is in your gift to give or take. A person who wants nothing from you, your grace, is the only person in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You do well to keep one about you always. They're worth more than a famous London auditor, and a deal harder to come by." He looked at her a long moment through the ticking sleet. "And you want nothing from me." "Nothing you could give me," Margaret said, and believed it, and went to fetch the arrears book, and did not see the look on his face as she crossed the room, which was the look of a man quietly reworking a sum he had thought long settled. They talked, in those weeks, more than either had talked to another living soul in years, and one gray afternoon, staring at the sleet, he told her the thing he had told no one. "I did not even want the title," he said. "I quarreled with my father over my going for a sailor, and never made it up, for the letter that would have was still unwritten in my sea chest when the news came. And I came home to a place quietly dying, and let a smiling man show me a fair book and tell me it was the weather, because I had not the patience to reckon it out myself. I let my father's inheritance be bled white, because it was pleasanter to trust a handsome ledger than to check it. And I did not think to ask the one person on my estate who had the reckoning of it, because she was a woman and a servant, and I had never troubled to learn her name." "And why is that, your grace?" Margaret asked quietly, not looking up from the column she was footing, because she had learned that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at. "Because the ones who come close are generally after something," he said. "The place, the money, the name. I learned it young, and harder at sea, where a captain is flattered by every man who wants a berth or a good word in his report. It is easier to be alone and know why men smile at you than to be surrounded and always wondering. Corvin is the nearest thing I have to a friend, and Corvin is my servant, and I pay him, and so even that is spoiled a little." He looked at her. "But you will not take my money above your wage. You argue with me. You told me to my face that my own inattention let the theft run, and did not soften it to spare me. You are the first person in 20 years who has cost me nothing to be near, and I do not know what to make of you at all." Margaret set down her pen and for once did not have a quick, plain answer ready. "I'll tell you what to make of me," she said at last. "I'm a woman who found out young she had one thing worth having, that I could hold 100 figures in my head and know when they were lying. Not beauty, you can see I've none. Not a fortune. Only that I could sit with a tangle of other men's sums, longer and stiller than any of them, and find the one crooked figure that threw out all the rest. And a person built entirely out of the one thing that can't be faked. For a figure cannot be charmed. It either tallies with the world or it does not. Loses the very trick of shading the truth to please a great man. Not out of courage, out of long practice at the opposite. I'm only a woman who tells the truth because it's the single thing I was ever good at, and I've grown too proud of it to give it up." The Duke was silent for a long time. "You are the richer of the two of us," he said at last, "and always have been, and that is the joke the world has kept from me my whole life." "The world keeps that joke from most great men," said Margaret, taking up her pen again. "It's not kind to spoil it for them. They don't thank you. Now go up to the house, your grace, and eat something, for you've stood at that window since noon and think I've not noticed. And a man that forgets his dinner works his sums crooked by candlelight, the same as a purser after a long watch." For the household had begun to feel the change, and it pleased them less than it pleased her, since it upset the order of things they leaned upon. And Margaret felt the small silences when she passed. "They think I'm reaching above myself," she said to Corvin one morning. Plainly, the two of them going over the tenant book in the cold office. Mrs. Fenwick and the rest. "They think I've got notions. Now Cade's gone, and I've his room and his book." "They think," said Corvin, looking up over his spectacles, "what small people always think when they see one of their own singled out. That it must be by some trick, since it can't be by desert. For if it were by desert, then any of them might have earned it and did not, and there's no thought less comfortable than that one." He looked at her with his flat, tired, kindly eyes. "Pay it no mind, Mrs. Aldous. You've done nothing wrong. You've saved an honest inheritance that a famous man couldn't save, and told a grieving master the truth when it would have been easier to bob a curtsy and let him drown in it, and he's had the wit to be grateful. If the household can't bear the sight of that, the fault's in the household, and in Fenwick, who's a small soul in a big set of keys and always was." "That's a handsome thing to say, Mr. Corvin, and I thank you for it. But it's easy for you. You're the Duke's own man. Your place isn't in this house, so you don't mind losing your standing in it." "No more, I think," said Corvin quietly, "is yours any longer. Though it's not my place to say so, and I'll not say it again." And he took off his spectacles and polished them and went back to the tenant book, and left Margaret standing in the cold office light with a feeling that was not quite fear and not quite hope, understanding for the first time that whatever was happening to her had already gone too far to be undone, and that she stood now between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither, and that this was a lonely place to stand, and would grow lonelier before it grew otherwise, if it ever did. The break, when it came in the servants' hall, over the bread and cheese of a wet noon, and it came from Mrs. Fenwick, who had been swelling toward it for a fortnight. "I'm sure," said the housekeeper, to the room at large, but at Margaret in particular, in the voice of a woman who is not sure at all and means everyone to know it, "I'm sure it's a fine thing to be so very thick with his grace. A keeper of rent books that came up in a cottage at the park gate. A fine thing. I only wonder that some folk find the time for their own proper work. with all this sitting in the great muniment room being consulted by dukes. There's the linen inventory a fortnight overdue that I hear no one's cast up. But there, some of us keep grander company now. The room went still. The maids studied their bread. Margaret set down her knife. The linen inventory, she said quietly, I cast up and copied fair on Monday, Mrs. Fenwick, the whole of it, and left it on your still-room shelf, as you'd know if you'd looked there instead of at me. I've not missed a rent day, nor a tradesman's bill, nor an arrears call in this house since the great account fell to me. If I had, you'd have had it round the whole servants' hall before the kettle boiled. So let's have the true grievance, and not the linen, for the linen's done, and we're neither of us fools. The true grievance, said Mrs. Fenwick, coloring, is that you've got above yourself, Meg Aldous, and the whole house sees it, but you. Being sent for by his grace. Being asked your opinion, as if you were quality, as if 30 years of me keeping this household counted for nothing against a woman that scribbles in a ledger. It isn't fitting. It isn't your place, and when it ends, as end it must, for such things always end, it's this hall you'll be crawling back to, and I only hope you'll not have made yourself too fine for the company you'll be glad enough of again. It was said in spite, but there was fear under the spite. The old deep fear of the below-stairs world, that one of its own, singled out, will forget the rest, and that the order which shelters them all will crack. Margaret heard the fear under it, and it took the anger out of her, and she answered the fear and not the spite. I've not forgotten one soul in this hall, she said, and I'll not, whatever comes. I taught half the young ones at this table their letters and their sums, Mrs. Fenwick, and sat up with your sister's fever the year the doctor wouldn't come out in the snow. If his grace asks my reckoning, I give it, for it would be dumb insolence to hold my tongue when I know the answer. But I didn't seek it. I sat up that night with Cade's book, because Corvin begged me, and no one else could read it, and I'd have done the same for the smallest tenant cheated of his due. You may call that above myself if you like. I call it my trade. And I'll thank you not to make out that 11 years of keeping this estate's rents true was scribbling, for it was the one honest reckoning in a robbed house, and you'd all have been turned off into a bankrupt ruin within the year if it hadn't been kept. There was a silence. Then old Barrow, the under-butler, who spoke perhaps once a season, said gruffly into his mug, She found my pension gone short when Cade docked it, and never said a word to shame me, only saw it made right. And a young housemaid down the bench said, Aye, and she wrote out my mother's letters when her eyes failed, and read me the ones back, and never told a soul I couldn't read them myself. And Mrs. Fenwick, outnumbered by the plain memory of the room, went red and then white and stumped out into the wet, and did not speak to Margaret for a fortnight, and then, being not truly a bad woman, but only a proud and frightened one, made it up over a sick scullery maid with no word said on either side, which is how such things are mended in a servants' hall. But the exchange had cost Margaret something, and she carried it to the muniment room that afternoon in her face, and the Duke, who by now read her as closely as she read his ledger, saw it at once. Something has happened, he said, straightening from the window. Below, in the hall. Tell me. It's nothing, your grace. A servants' hall squall. It's mended, or mending. It is not nothing. You have the look you had the first morning, in the passage, the look of a woman who has stood her ground and been bruised for it. Tell me who has been unkind to you in my own house. And I will. You'll do nothing, she said, sharply, and then, gentler. You'll do nothing, your grace, if you've any care for me at all. Do you not see it? If you take my part in that hall, you make it true. You make me the woman who has the Duke's ear, who need only murmur, and a housekeeper of 30 years is turned off. You'd ruin me with the kindness. The only way I keep my place among them is to fight my own battles at my own table, and win or lose them on my own account, as one of them, and not as your favorite. She said the word as though it were a false entry. Let me be, your grace. I've faced down harder rooms than a servant's hall. This one I can manage, if you'll only keep your hands off it. He looked at her a long moment, and something in his hard face was working. Why do I run from your favor as though it carried the plague? She set down her pen. Because a lord's favor is the plague to a woman like me. A great man takes a fancy to raise a servant, and the day the fancy passes, and it always passes, she's left with the hatred of everyone she was raised over, and no place in any world. I swore long ago that whatever I got, I'd get by my own hand and hold by my own right, so no man's changing mind could take it from me. My rule is mine. My reckoning is mine. The trust of a tenant is mine, and no one can ungive it. Those are the only things truly safe, and I'll not trade them for your favor, which is here today and married to an heiress by this time 12-month. She stopped. Forgive me, I speak too plain. No, said the Duke, very quietly. No, you speak exactly plain enough. You always have. And he said nothing more that afternoon about defending her, and let her go to her ledgers when the light failed. But he stood long after at the tall window, in the dusk, turning over the words married to an heiress, by this time 12-month, and finding, somewhat to his own alarm, that the picture they made, of himself at a fine table in a mended house, across from a pale, well-bred girl who would agree that his accounts were sound because she had never troubled to read them, filled him with a flat gray dread he could not at first account for, and then could account for all too well. For Josiah Cade was not so easily done with as a man taken red-handed ought to be. The Duke, with no love of scandal on his newly mended name, had not yet laid the information, and Cade, who had 20 years' plunder salted away, spent that winter in London with a sharp, cheap attorney, building his defense. And his defense was not to deny the figures, they were past denying, but to deny the reckoner, to have the one unlettered cottage woman who found them shown to be herself the forger, who had cooked the receipts and doctored the tenant book she alone had kept, out of an old maid's spite, for a jury of gentlemen would sooner hang a scribbling spinster than one of their own. He had marked that Mrs. Fenwick nursed a grievance, and he wrote to her, not to the Duke, a smooth letter full of concern for the good name of the house, and Mrs. Fenwick, God forgive her, wrote back. He came in the last week of February, when the accounts were near mended and the estate beginning, slowly, to show the true color of health again under Margaret's patient hand, and he came in a fury, dressed as injured innocence. He came in a hired chaise with his cheap, sharp attorney beside him, and he did not go humbly to the back door, but walked in at the front as though he still owned the running of the place, into the great hall where, by ill chance, or by Fenwick's contrivance, for she had known the hour, half the upper household was gathered about some matter of the spring cleaning, and the Duke himself was crossing to the library with Corvin at his heel. And Cade, seeing the hall full and the household watching, and the Duke arrested mid-floor, chose, being the kind of man he was, to fight his battle in front of an audience. Your Grace, he said, loud and rolling, sweeping off his hat, a whine of injury dressed as boldness in his voice. I come for justice. I have been these 2 months a ruined man, my 20 years' honest service blackened, and on whose word? On the word of that woman there. and he flung out his arm at Margaret, who had come to the hall door with a rent book, and stopped dead. A scribbling old maid that no counting house would employ, who alone kept the very receipts she used to damn me, and could as easily have forged them as read them, and did, out of a spinster's spite at a man set over her. Who ever gave a woman leave to keep a gentleman's accounts, unless it was to cover the very thefts she now lays at my door? I say the forger stands there in her gray gown and her ink, and I demand that she be given up to the law, and this creature turned off your estate. That's God's truth, your grace, said Mrs. Fenwick thickly from the side of the hall, not meeting Margaret's eye. 30 years I've kept this household, and never seen the like of a cottage woman set up in the master's own muniment room over trained men. It's not fitting. It's not right. Mr. Cade was always good to us. There's two sides to every reckoning, and we've only ever heard the one. She might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence over 39 years. But the Duke had drawn breath to speak, and she saw in his face that he meant to defend her, to throw his newly mended name and all his authority before his whole household on a rent clerk against a gentleman and a lawyer, and she could not let him, for it would cost him more than it saved her. A great man may keep an eccentric servant. He may not be seen to stake his word on one against a man of business and his own household, not without a whisper following him ever after that his counting woman had bewitched him and cooked his books between them. She saw all this in the half-second before he spoke, the way she saw a false total the instant her eye fell on the foot of a column, and she made her second life remaking decision as plainly as the first. So Margaret Aldous set down her rent book on the hall table and folded her ink-stained hands in front of her gray gown and defended herself. "Mr. Cade," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the cold stone hall, because it did not shake. "You ask where are my credentials. I have none, for no counting house in England will train a woman, as you know, having profited by it 20 years. You say I could have forged the receipts. I did not forge one, and I can prove it, which no forger ever can. The receipts I laid before His Grace are signed in the tradesman's own hands, living men in this county that any bench may send for, and every one will swear to his own signature and his true price. A woman may forge a paper, Mr. Cade. She cannot forge a living tradesman's memory of what he charged. They are not my word against yours, they are the town's word against your book, and I am only the hand that laid them side by side." She took a step into the hall, and Josiah Cade, to his own surprise, took one back. "And you say I doctored the tenant book," she went on, "which I alone kept. Then send for the tenants, sir. They are 45 living families on this ground, and every one holds a rent receipt in my hand for what he paid, and every receipt has its fellow stub in my book, and the two agree to a farthing, and do not agree with your ledger. Set them before any auditor you like, and the theft reckons out the same every time, because the truth of a sum does not change with the reckoner. That is the whole terror of an honest account to a thief. It does not need me. I found it, but I am not it. You have not come to clear yourself. You have come to have the one eye that troubled to look put out before it teaches the others to see. You are too late." The silence in the great hall was total. The winter light lay flat and gold across the stone, and the dust hung in it, and no one moved. Josiah Cade had gone the color of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and looked, for the first time, directly at her. And what he saw in the plain gray capped face was not ignorance, and not spite, but certainty. The terrible flat certainty of someone who is holding the truth and knows exactly how heavy it is and exactly how many hands besides her own can now lift it. His attorney, a sharp man who had come north on a rich brief and now smelled, all at once, a hopeless case and a client who had lied to him, leaned and murmured something urgent in his ear, and Cade's tallow face went a shade grayer. "This is," said Cade, and the bluster had gone thin as water, "this is a conspiracy. A pack of tenants and tradesmen suborned by a spiteful woman with the Duke's ear. No court would credit." "Then you've nothing to fear from the tradesmen, sir," said Margaret, "and no reason to want me turned off before they can be sent for. A man easy in his handling of an estate doesn't tremble when a rent clerk offers to set his ledger beside the whole county's receipts. He says, by all means, send for them, they'll clear me. I notice you've not said it. You came here today to have me put out of that muniment room before anyone else learns to read what I read in your book. You're too late, Mr. Cade. His Grace has read it. And Mr. Pruitt. And Corvin. And the estate itself," she nodded to the good land beyond the tall windows, "is the plainest witness of the lot. For there it lies that you swore was failing of bad seasons, coming back into heart under an honest reckoning. And not a tenant in the county will believe it's sickened by the weather when it mends so quick by the truth." "I see," said Cade, and his voice had gone to a thread, "that His Grace's house has been poisoned against a faithful servant by more than one means." He shot a look at Mrs. Fenwick, who had gone gray and was staring at the flagstones, having grasped a beat too late that her ally was drowning and would pull her down with him. "I'll not stay to be reckoned at by a scribbling old maid and a pack of receipts. Your Grace, I wish you joy of your counting woman when she has turned your household against every honest man in it, and you find yourself alone with her and her ledgers. You'll remember I warned you. My attorney will be in touch. Good day." He went. He turned on his heel and strode down the length of the cold hall and out at the great door he had come in by, his sharp attorney a half step behind him, already talking low and fast about withdrawing from the brief, and the sound of the chaise driving off went up between the house walls and came back down, and no one moved. And Margaret Aldous stood in the enormous quiet with her ink-stained hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. Now I shall be turned off too, most like, for a great house cannot easily keep the servant who shamed a gentleman and the head housekeeper together in its own hall. Whatever the truth of it." She turned to the Duke to say something of the kind, to make it easy for him, to give notice before she could be given it. He was looking at her as though he had never seen her before. "Mrs. Aldous," said the Duke of Wyverne, and it was the first time in 11 years anyone in that house had put the Mrs. in front of her name and meant it as an honor, "will you come into the library? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout at the length of my own hall in front of the maids." She left her rent book on the hall table and went up to the library. Mrs. Fenwick, by the wall, sat down heavily on the edge of a settle, a woman who has bet her standing on the wrong man and knows it. Corvin, at the Duke's heel, allowed himself, for the first time in the whole affair, the ghost of a smile, and then, being Corvin, took it off his face and cleared the hall of gaping servants with 3 flat words and a jerk of his head, and set them back to their spring cleaning, so that whatever passed in the library should at least pass unwitnessed by the household. What passed in the library that February afternoon Margaret never repeated to a living soul, and neither did he, and so it must be given here as the two of them alone knew it, which is to say plainly, and with the understanding that plain words were the only kind either of them trusted. He shut the door. The room was full of the flat gold light of a winter afternoon, falling across the ranked books and the great globe and the long table where an estate map lay half unrolled, the same map that had lit and darkened behind him all those mornings at the office window. And Margaret stood in the middle of it, with her hands folded, and waited to be thanked and pensioned and sent away, and had her whole speech ready, how she had served the estate gladly, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character, so that she might find another situation that wanted a woman who could keep a true book. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down without meaning to. She refused it. He offered, next, to make her steward of Wyverne in fact and in name both, over any man in England, with a proper salary and the office and rooms of her own, and this she did not refuse. But she did not answer either, because she could see, in his face, that it was not what he had brought her into the library to offer, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of easier things, the way a man works up to the hard total by footing the easy columns first. "Your Grace," she said, when he had run out of easy things and stood at the window with his back to her, silent, looking down at the estate spread out in the winter light. "You're a plain-dealing man. When you let yourself be, and I've never known you a coward, whatever it is you brought me in here to say, say it. For there's a quarter's rents below that I've not entered, and I'd rather leave them unentered an hour for the truth than stand here for a speech that goes round and round the field and never foots the column." "Adrian," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name, and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a hand flat on his chest, and he turned. "There, I've said it once, and the roof's not fallen. Now you say your piece, and I'll say mine, and we'll neither of us be cowards about it. For I'm too old to be courted round the houses, and you're too honest to enjoy the doing of it." So he said it, plainly, in the plain words they both trusted. "You stood in my hall an hour ago," he said, "and you would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, Meg, when nothing else in 20 years has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you before the whole household, they would say you had witched me and cooked my books between us, and you would sooner take the whole weight of that man's slander and be turned out onto the road than let it cost me a farthing. A servant, with nothing, protected a duke, with everything, and asked nothing for it, and meant to walk out of my life without letting me thank her. And I stood there and understood that in my whole guarded, well-defended life I have never once been loved by a person who wanted nothing from me, and that I was about to let her go. Margaret said nothing. She could not. "I am not offering you rank," he went on, and the roughened quarterdeck voice went for a moment unsteady. "Rank is nothing. It brought me a cold house and a father I quarreled with and buried, and an estate robbed hollow under my own trusting eye. I am offering you the only thing I have found worth the giving, a partnership of equals in the plain sight of God, my name to yours, my judgment laid open to your plain sense every day that we both live. Spend what's left of both our days keeping me honest, for no one else alive is willing to try, and I find, Meg, that I cannot go back to being lied to. You have shown me the difference between being served and being loved, and a man cannot unsee that, and I will not have any woman in England but the one who taught it to me across a ledger." Margaret Aldous was 39 years old, and she had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions. And she discovered in that library that she had been nursing the largest illusion of all, the one that told her that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and fully loved for exactly what she was. "There will be a great scandal she said, when she could speak. There will, he agreed. A magnificent one. The dowagers of the whole county will take to their beds. I find I am looking forward to it. They'll say you married your counting woman. They'll say I trapped you, or charmed you, or cooked the books to ruin an honest steward and creep into his room and then into yours. They'll say it of me till I die, and some of 'em after. You know they will. You've lived among them. You know exactly what they are. I do, he said. I know them to the bone. And I do not care a straw for the opinion of people I do not respect, upon a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. They will say the Duke of Wyverne married the woman who caught the thief a famous London auditor could not, and saved his inheritance with nothing but a brass rule and the patience to check a book against the world. Let them say it. It is even true. And he crossed the room and held out his hand to her. Not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand offered to be taken, palm up, level, between equals, marked across the back with an old white scar from some sea fight. Meg, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare a person's feelings. Do not begin now. And Margaret Aldous, counting woman of Wyverne, looked at the offered hand and at the gray eyes that had learned at 43 not to lie to her. And she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first morning, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. Yes, she said. God help us both. Yes, they were married in the small gray parish church at the edge of the park, quietly in the last week of March, with the first green in the hedges and the whole scandalized county watching from behind its curtains, and not one of them invited. Corvin gave the bride away, gravely, and thought his old sea-hardened heart would crack with the rightness of it. Mrs. Fenwick wept through the whole service, and when the plain vows were said, the little church was so still they could hear the rooks in the churchyard elms, and, faint across the park, the estate's own bells begun to ring, and more than one hard old tenant, come to Gop and stayed to be moved, said afterward that the silence when the counting woman became the Duchess of Wyverne was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. She never played the great lady, and never tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels, and kept her own key to the muniment room and her father's brass counting rule in the desk drawer, and went down to the office most mornings as she always had, to keep the great account in her own hand and turn away no tenant who brought a trouble to her window. And Josiah Cade, when the Duke did at last lay the information, for Margaret would not let a theft go unreckoned even to spare a scandal, holding that a debt owed to the truth is the one debt no rank excuses, fled the county a step ahead of the law and lived out his years small and shabby on what plunder he had left, which is a colder ruin than a prison, and the estate he had bled came back, under an honest reckoning, into the richest and best ordered in that whole broad reach of shire. She trained clever young women under her, stewards and tenants' grown daughters with quick heads and no prospects, and taught them to keep a book and read a column and never in their lives be robbed for want of the reckoning, so that her knowledge should pass into hands that would use it. She and the Duke were seen, by such of the county as would still receive them, to be the most quietly contented couple in the shire, and the sharper sort observed that his Grace, who had come home hard as a ship's timber and half in his grave, had become a man at ease in his own skin, who laughed easily and lied never, and looked at his unlikely Duchess across their supper table as though he could not quite believe his own good sense. And the county, which had come to sneer, came slowly and grudgingly to something else. For it is one thing to keep up a scandal about people you never see, and another about neighbors whose duchess sits up a night to save a widow's whole, living from a cheating factor, and takes no fee. The dowagers who had taken to their beds got up again, in time, and found that the Duke and Duchess of Wyverne could not be cut without cutting off the best run and most open-handed estate in the county, and one by one, with the poor grace of proud people admitting a mistake, they came round. A few, the honest ones, came simply to say they had been wrong, and were received without a flicker of triumph, and given tea, and never once reminded of it, which shamed them more than any reproach could have done. He lived another 30 years, the same span, she once remarked, that she had kept his rents unregarded, and he died at last in his own bed, with his scarred hand in her ink-stained one, and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat with his ruined books at the beginning, still and true, and told him the truth to the last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it, and he laughed his rusty laugh one final time and told her she was the only sound account he had ever cast up, and slept, and did not wake. And she closed his gray eyes herself and did not weep until the door was shut, because she had always believed that a person's grief, like the true state of an estate, is their own and not a thing to be performed for onlookers. She outlived him by 7 years, and kept the great account to the end, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of shire and field that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep, tenants and clerks and the grown households of the women she had taught to reckon, far more than had ever lined them for any duke, and among them not a few of the fine folk who had once taken to their beds at the scandal of her, and lived long enough to be ashamed of it, and glad they had come round in time to know her. And they carried behind her coffin, on a cushion, her father's plain brass counting rule, and her own first true ledger, which the whole shire agreed, that day, was a stranger honor than any crest, and no more than her due. There is an old saying among the reckoners of the shire country, that a great estate never lies about its health, though the ledger may lie for it, and the whole art of an honest reckoning is to know the one from the other. Margaret Aldous kept the true books at Wyverne for 11 years before anyone above the bailiff troubled to learn her name, and for 30 years after as its mistress, and never once shaded a figure to spare a great person's feelings. She was not saved by her meekness, nor by her beauty, for she had neither. She was saved, if saved is the word for a woman who was in plain truth the one doing the saving, by the plain, unfakeable fact of what she knew, and by the courage to stake everything on it in a world forever dazzled by the handsome ledger and the gentleman's word. And that was the whole of her, and it made her the truest lady in the county. The poor whose accounts she kept straight said it first, and the tenants after, and in the fullness of years even the great folk who had scorned her came to say it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with saying, that a plain, gray-gowned woman with ink on her fingers had sat up one night and reckoned the truth of a robbed estate, and told nothing but that truth to a grieving duke, and it made her the truest lady in the county. And it was said of her, long after, whenever a proud man was flattered to his ruin or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness, said quietly, the way the truest things are said, that she had mended with a brass rule and a night's patience what a whole train of clever men had let be robbed for want of the humility to check a book against the world. And it made her the truest lady in the county. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.